deal fall apart.
It wasn't my fault.
Excuses, you're done here.
This is outrageous.
The conference room was filled with powerful people. Executives in expensive suits sat around the massive glass table, discussing a deal worth millions of dollars. At the head of the table sat Richard Hawthorne, a millionaire investor known for his sharp mind and even sharper arrogance. No one dared challenge him, until a quiet young employee sitting at the far end of the room raised his hand. Richard looked at him and laughed dismissively. "You know nothing about this," he said loudly, causing several executives to smirk. The young man stayed calm. He slowly stood up, walked toward the screen, and said something that instantly wiped the smile off the millionaire's face. Within seconds, the entire room fell into stunned silence. Because the person Richard had just mocked was about to reveal a truth that could save the entire company from disaster. And by the end of that meeting, no one would ever underestimate him again. Ethan Carter had always believed that hard work mattered more than titles. Growing up in a small apartment with his single father, he learned early that life rarely gave people second chances. His father worked long hours as a mechanic, often coming home late with grease on his hands and exhaustion in his eyes. But despite the struggles, Ethan's father always repeated the same lesson. Never let anyone make you feel small because you started with less. Ethan carried those words with him through school, through college, and eventually into his first job at Hawthorne Financial Group, one of the most powerful investment firms in the city. For Ethan, getting hired there felt like a miracle. But the reality of working in a corporate empire was more difficult than he imagined. Young employees like him were rarely heard. Most decisions were made by executives with years of experience and enormous wealth. At the center of it all was Richard Hawthorne, the company's founder and millionaire CEO. Richard was brilliant, ambitious, and famous for turning small opportunities into massive fortunes. But he also had a reputation for something else. He didn't like being challenged. One Monday morning, the company gathered in the executive conference room for an important meeting. They were about to approve a huge investment in a new technology company that promised enormous profits. Richard stood confidently near the large screen displaying charts and projections. "This deal will double our revenue within 3 years," he announced proudly. Most executives nodded in agreement. But Ethan, sitting quietly near the back of the room, felt a growing knot in his stomach. He had spent the entire weekend analyzing the numbers. And something didn't make sense. The projections were too optimistic. The financial reports from the partner company had several inconsistencies. Ethan raised his hand hesitantly. Richard noticed immediately. "Yes," he said impatiently. Ethan swallowed nervously. "I think there might be a problem with the data." A few executives exchanged amused looks. Richard chuckled slightly. "And you are?" "Ethan Carter. Junior analyst." Richard leaned back in his chair. "A junior analyst thinks he found a problem in a deal my senior advisors approved." The room filled with quiet laughter. Then Richard waved his hand dismissively. "You know nothing about this." The laughter grew louder. But Ethan didn't sit down. Instead, he walked slowly toward the presentation screen. "I might be young," he said calmly. "But I checked the numbers 3 times. The room grew slightly quieter. Ethan pointed to a chart on the screen. "These revenue projections are based on customer growth that doesn't exist yet." He clicked to the next slide. And the partner company's debt was hidden in a subsidiary report most people didn't notice. The laughter stopped. Ethan opened one final document. "If we sign this deal today, the company will lose nearly $40 million within 2 years." The room fell silent. Richard stared at the screen, his confident smile slowly fading. Because the numbers Ethan showed were impossible to ignore. For a long moment, no one spoke. Executives studied the data Ethan had presented. Every number matched. Every document was real. The deal that looked like a golden opportunity was actually a financial trap. Richard slowly stood up. The room held its breath. Ethan expected anger. Or humiliation. Instead, Richard walked toward the screen and examined the numbers carefully. "You're saying the partner company hid their debt here," he said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Yes." Richard flipped through several documents. And none of my senior advisors noticed this. Silence filled the room. Finally, Richard turned toward Ethan. How long did it take you to find this? Ethan hesitated. 2 days. The room erupted in murmurs. Richard studied him carefully. Then something unexpected happened. The millionaire laughed. But this time it wasn't mocking laughter. It was impressed. Well, he said, shaking his head slightly. It seems the one person who knew something about this was the one everyone ignored. The executives looked embarrassed. Richard extended his hand toward Ethan. You just saved this company $40 million. Ethan shook his hand nervously. But Richard wasn't finished. He turned to the room. Let this be a lesson for everyone here. He pointed toward Ethan. Talent doesn't care about titles. The executives listened carefully. Sometimes the smartest voice in the room belongs to the youngest person sitting quietly in the corner. Then Richard looked back at Ethan. Starting tomorrow, you won't be a junior analyst anymore. Ethan blinked in surprise. You'll be joining our strategic investment team. The room burst into applause. But the most important moment happened later that evening. Ethan called his father. You remember what you always told me, he asked. About not letting people make me feel small. His father laughed warmly. Of course. Well, Ethan said proudly. Today I proved you right. And somewhere inside the massive glass tower of Hawthorne Financial Group, a young employee had just changed his future. All because he had the courage to speak when everyone else stayed silent.